Chapter 1. Andres Sullivan. Issa had sworn she'd never set foot again in the bar where she had been humiliated so many years ago. Yet, here she was. Her heart was certainly beating a lot faster than usual, but not because she was scared, even if she were to run into that monster of a man again. The corner of Issa's mouth pulled up. Now she would know how to handle him. The dingy-looking bar was situated between two clubs. As a result, loud music collided with obnoxious clattering from the gaming halls around the corner, and a song Issa recognized from a popular advertisement for the local chain of pod hotels. The doorman was staring her down. No surprise there. Issa didn't blend in with the colorless inhabitants of the lower sector. She had hastily pushed her blonde, shoulder-length hair underneath her favorite cap, hoping she wouldn't be recognized by the surveillance drones flying overhead. Her fingerless gloves and baseball jacket would offer her some cover, though she doubted it would be necessary tonight. For a split second, she studied the old jacket that hugged her frame. She stared at the hole in the left sleeve, the fabric fraying. It used to be his favorite jacket. Would he recognize it if they were ever to meet again? Would he recognize her? Just as fast as she had allowed herself to think about him, she pushed the thoughts away. She sucked on the lollipop in her mouth, sour, just like her, like those monsters had made her. Her porcelain skin was flushed from running all the way out here, and her lips were tinted immaculately in her favorite red shade, crimson red. Hardly subtle, but then she'd always had a flair for the dramatic. Issa lifted her gaze back to the building covered in graffiti and the sidewalk lined with torn-open bin bags, rats skittering between the filth. Only the neon sign spelling, "The Shard," betrayed that the building was in fact a bar. It still looked exactly the same, like nothing had changed in all those years. The guests in this establishment undoubtedly still were the very same pigs, eager to drown their sorrows with a stiff drink, keeping dubious company and cheating at hollow cards. Issa took a deep breath in, breathed out, and stepped inside. A haze of smoke and the penetrating smell of alcohol slammed into her. The neon lights in the bar flashed so angrily, she could feel a headache coming on already. Issa looked at her reflection in the mirrored wall behind the counter. The helpless girl she used to be, that had ended up here years ago, wouldn't recognize the woman in the mirror. They were as different as night and day. "You sure you're in the right place, lady?" the gray-haired bartender asked. His mechanical eye looked her up and down, the thing making a clicking noise. Clearly a cheap, vintage model. No threat to her. Issa let her gaze wander through the bar. "Trust me, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." She leaned on the bar counter. "Give me a whiskey." The bartender raised an eyebrow but obeyed when Issa pressed her hand to the scanner on the counter and it beeped in approval. He slid the filled glass over the counter towards her. She sniffed at the dark brown liquid but didn't drink it. "Who of these bastards is Andres Sullivan?" "Never heard of him." The bartender polished the glass in his hands more thoroughly, even though the thing was beyond clean. Issa smirked, and her expression seemed to make him even more nervous. She turned around, leaning back on the counter. "I'm looking for Andres Sullivan," Issa yelled over the terrible background music. The murmuring silenced. Then a huge figure rose from the shadows. She recognized him from the description. Bald, a dark beard, a hooked nose, double chin but muscular arms, a huge scar that ran through his cheek. This was the guy she was looking for. "Can I help you?" His voice was velvety soft and did not match his scruffy looks. Issa lifted her chin. Slowly but surely, she walked in between the tables towards him. She felt the countless gazes prickling her back and smiled. Issa rather loved having an audience. During the last steps towards him, she raised the glass of cold whiskey, sloshing around the liquid. Sullivan, you have quite the reputation in this neighborhood. Sullivan smiled, revealing his yellow teeth. Who spoke so highly of me? Issa tilted her head to the side. She brushed her index finger along one of the tables, leaving a line in the greasy surface there. Does the name Maria Coe ring a bell? His gaze turned to ice in a fraction of a second. Issa took the glass of whiskey and, using all her unnatural strength, smashed it against his head. Shattered glass and whiskey rained down. Before he had the chance to react, she planted her booted foot deep in his stomach, and he flew backwards, pulling his companions with him onto the floor. Yelling rose up from the other tables. As easily as if they were extensions of her own body, Issa found her 2 handguns in her inside pockets. She pointed the weapons at his chest. Sleep tight, Sullivan. He stared at her, the eyes of a monster. She pulled the triggers. Her bullets pierced his chest, his body shaking and sputtering with the impact of every bullet. Then his head lolled to the side, eyes lifeless. Silence followed. Anyone else? She yelled, letting her gaze wander around the room. The bystanders soundlessly dropped back into the seats of their chairs. Thought so. She spat on the dead body of Andres Sullivan. Maria Coe's goodbye kiss. Sadly, Maria was not there to deliver it personally, thanks to Sullivan. A wave of sadness crashed into Issa, just for a moment. But Issa had to take care of this, for Maria. A stumbling noise sounded behind Issa, and she immediately raised her guns, before she even looked at her new target. Anyone else want to be punished for their unforgivable sins? She swung around and looked straight into almond-shaped brown eyes. His bronze-colored skin was abnormally pale. Issa. Not more than a whisper. Black, sleek hair, a stubble beard, thin lips that usually curled up mysteriously, but not now. Slowly, she dropped her guns. Calm. She had to remain calm. She suppressed the trembling in her hands. Let's continue this conversation outside. Her voice was cold while she turned away from him and searched for the back exit. She heard how he followed her through the halls, through the back door, and into a dark alleyway. Sirens sounded along the abandoned street. Issa checked every shadow and every unguarded rooftop within a few seconds. Only then she dared to look at him. She breathed in the cold air. Ren. Issa. He stared at her, bewildered. Do you still hang around suspicious bars and dark clubs looking for your next assignment? She heard herself say. She couldn't breathe. As he spoke, Issa was confused by Ren's broad shoulders, the new sharpness of his features. And he was so tall. Of course, he always had been. How could she have forgotten how Ren always used to tower over her? Living from assignment to assignment, such is the eternal fate of a bounty hunter, Ren said. Then his thick brows furrowed. But what happened to you? Are you killing petty local criminals like Sullivan nowadays? Issa finally put her guns away. Only if they deserve it. Ren narrowed his eyes slightly. Who do you work for these days? Delamar. Who's that? My patroness. He crossed his arms. What does she want from you? Let's just say we bring justice. So this Delamar wanted you to finish off Andres Sullivan? The corners of her mouth pulled upwards. No, this one I did as a favor. To who? Maria Coe. He raised his eyebrows questioningly. A colleague, she said. A friend. Well, you can be proud. Maria got her way. She's dead. He stilled. Sullivan beat all the life out of her. She died alone in a street not too far from here. Issa's chest rose and fell quickly. She ground her teeth. Not here. Not now. Wren stared at her inquisitively, the disapproval in his eyes growing with every one of her racing heartbeats. Issa's patience for his judgmental looks was running out. Is the thought of me being able to protect myself without your help so awful? Of course not. Then why are you looking at me like that? I did what was necessary to survive, she sneered. I know that. You just look different. His amber eyes studied her, as if he couldn't put his finger on what exactly about her was different. Don't get me wrong, the result is admirable. You look good. The last thing I need is your approval. I say you look good, and you only hear that I find it necessary to approve of you? He smiled faintly. She opened her mouth and closed it again. Then she crossed her arms. His gaze dropped to her left sleeve. You've made a hole in my jacket. Not me. A target that was making it particularly difficult for me to do my job, she said. Yet I don't see any blood marks. I may be a bounty hunter, but I'm not a barbarian. Some people actually wash their clothes. Right. Only because you're not a barbarian. Not because it's my jacket. It was your jacket. I gave you my jacket because you were cold, not because I didn't want it back. He smiled and flashed his pointy canines. Issa had always thought they made him look rather charming. I presumed you didn't count on getting your jacket back after we were ambushed and had to split up. Emotion colored her voice. She couldn't hold it back anymore. His gaze was warm, like the warmth of a fire. Familiar, comforting. Keep it then, as long as you remember that it's my jacket you're wearing. How could I forget? She whispered. A clattering noise behind them made her jump. Damn it, she never usually startled this easily. 1 minute in the proximity of her old partner and she was already slipping. The noise got louder. It was clear that the other attendants in the bar had finally found the courage to chase after her. I have to go. He grabbed her by the arm. Where are you going? I'm staying in the neighborhood for a few days. I have some jobs to finish here. If you think I'm letting you go, you're wrong. His fingers were still resting on her arm. I don't need your protection. Not anymore. That's not... She shook off his hand. Come along, then.